Let's fix the United States' awful borders. And it's not me who's saying that, guys. It's Geography by Jeff. What does he mean by awful borders? Like, because to me, at least from looking at the map from this view, everything seems fairly good. But I suppose when you zoom in, it's not quite as clean as this. Maybe there's certain borders that go like over rivers that are kind of like crooked, maybe. Like, why are the borders, a bone of contention? Because he's not the first person I've heard say this about the United States and its borders. Like, what's going on here?
The United States is a mess. As it grew from east to west, it acquired territories, carved them up, divided them even more, and eventually made them all into individual states. But this process made no sense, and many states were divided and created for stupid political reasons rather than anything natural. When all was said and done, we ended up with a country whose state borders look very fake. So I decided to fix them, mostly along natural borders, but also there's some other stuff too. And before you get too riled up, this is gonna be fun.
I mean, the thing is though, like when you start rearranging borders, certain states are going to get smaller, aren't they? And the people from that state will probably not like there's a reason why borders, rarely get moved after they've been like agreed
Probably.
No more duplicates.
The first place I want to start as we fix borders are the states that are essentially just duplicates that were formed for reasons that never really made sense in the first place. The biggest culprit here is North and South Dakota. These two states were originally created out of a single territory called Dakota. But when the territory was about to be admitted as a full state, it was quickly divided into two states in order to give the Republican Party at the time a congressional advantage. Basically, we have two Dakotas for political reasons and nothing more, so they're now back to just being called Dakota. Up next are the...
Okay, residents of North and South Dakota, are you in favor of that? I'm guessing it's going to be a no, but if you would be in favor of joining up the Dakotas again, why? I suppose it would give you... There's probably advantages to having a bigger state, right? The economy of that state becomes larger, but then the population of the state also becomes larger as well. But would the pros outweigh the cons of joining up?
Carolinas. Now, these two date back before the United States was even a thing, so maybe there's an argument to keep them separate, but I'm not gonna do that. These two colonies split because of a war with a local indigenous tribe. The Northerners at the time required more resources to acquire the land they wanted, and the Southerners didn't really want to help, so they split. Well, that doesn't seem like a good enough reason for divorce to me, so now they're back to being just Carolina. And finally, we have the two Virginias. But unlike with the other two, I'm gonna keep these two separate, mostly because West Virginia broke away so as to stay with the Union during the American Civil War, and, well, I think that's a very good reason to become a separate state. Nice job, West Virginia. All right, with those states out of the way, let's...
Wow, Dakota is massive now. It is absolutely huge. I mean, Texas would still be bigger, it looks like, and Alaska, obviously, but it would probably be the third largest state in the US, right? Or, what's this one, though?
Let's get to fixing the rest of the borders. And we're going to start with the square states in the West. The United States has some wacky borders, mostly in the western half of the country. So we're going to chop all of these states up and break them apart, largely along natural features. This means using the Continental Divide, mountain ranges, rivers, and deserts to make these new borders, mostly in that order. So let's get to it. Now, given its prominence, we're going to start by dividing the states up by the Rocky Mountains and the Continental Divide that runs through it. So, from north to south, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico all get split in half, with their former western sides joining the states of Idaho.
When he says Continental Divide, what does he mean by that? Because, the USA is part of the North America continent, so surely all of this is part of one large continental divide, no? Like, what does he mean by this red line here?
Utah and Arizona, respectively. This already makes way more sense in my head. Let's keep heading west since we're going in that direction and focus on Nevada. Nevada is mostly one big desert. In fact, I ranked it the state with the worst geography because of this. So why not double down and just give them the deserts of California and Oregon as well? Done.
Oof.
This leaves California a little top heavy, but most of its population is in the south still, so it evens out. Maybe? And this just leaves Oregon and Washington. Honestly, both states are mostly fine except for one thing. Oregon is largely divided along the Columbia and Snake Rivers. But in the northeast of Oregon, instead of the border following the Snake River, it just cuts straight across. So we're just going to add that missing chunk back to Oregon and call it a day. As for the other western states, just a few minor changes.
California looks a lot smaller now, considering there's, 30 million people that live in California? That would just make the property prices shoot up even higher, wouldn't it?
The Dakotas are, of course, just a single state now. Done. Nebraska and Kansas are mostly fine, except Kansas City is now in Kansas. Come on, guys.
That does make sense. I thought, so Kansas City isn't in Kansas? What?
That one should be obvious. And then we're going to give Texas's hat to Oklahoma to get rid of that wonky little panhandle, and we'll make this divide along the Red River. Texas is way too big anyways, so it's time to slim up just a little bit. The West has been fixed, mostly. Things are still a little awkward, but it looks a lot more natural now. So let's move on to the rest of the states.
What do you guys think? So let's look at the... Hold on. Let's
still a little awkward, but it looks a lot more natural now. River. A lot more natural now. So...
are you in favor of this? This state here is gargantuan. Which state would this be? This is Nevada, right? Huge. Absolutely massive. I don't know why they don't, where the deserts are, why don't they just put loads of solar panels there? The electricity you could generate having that much, heat going in one direction, in one space, you could generate so much electricity.
Let's move on to the rest of the states. The eastern half of the United States is not in nearly as bad of shape, so our fixes over here will be relatively minor compared to the western, blockier half. But there's still some things I want to change. First, let's head to the deep south. This whole area is wrong. First, Louisiana is the only state that doesn't get divided up by the Mississippi River. But we can't have New Orleans and Baton Rouge in Mississippi, so we'll make a concession here. The eastern side of Louisiana up to Lake Pontchartrain will now be part of Mississippi, excluding Baton Rouge, which is a little weird, but still worth it. Next, Florida has a really long panhandle, preventing it from being a true peninsular state. So, let's just go ahead and give the western edge of Florida's panhandle to Alabama. It's not like Florida needs more coastline anyways. Also, I have a sneaking suspicion that that part of Florida is more culturally Alabama anyways. Moving north from Florida, we actually have another continental divide. This is the divide that largely follows the Appalachian Range, and just like with the Rockies, we're going to split up all of the states along this line. So that means that Georgia, Carolina, which was already merged together, Virginia, West Virginia.
So they're all going to get smaller then. All these states here, they're going to lose territory.
Maryland and Pennsylvania are all split. The eastern side will remain their own states, but the western ends will join Alabama.
You're going to have a lot of angry people here. They've just lost a ton of land.
Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio. The latter two split along the Ohio River. Now, you might have noticed that the Appalachian Continental Divide goes north into New York. You're not wrong to think that this might necessitate a split, but I decided not to split it in half because the only logical state that would absorb that land would be Ohio. And I just couldn't bring myself to make Ohio even bigger. So New York stays as is. Now, before we head too far north, there's one other thing we gotta fix: the Delmarva Peninsula. Right now, it's split between Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, with Delaware really getting shafted here. So, it's now all Delaware. As for the rest of the Northeast, it's fine. There's nothing too obvious here to fix. New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts,
I mean, you could argue that Rhode Island being so small, why not just join it with Connecticut? But, then why should they have to lose their statehood just to make it look neater, I guess?
Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine get to keep their current borders. Congratulations.
Wow, Rhode Island is tiny. It is so small compared to Texas. How many Rhode Islands could you fit in Texas?
On either not being awkward enough for me to fix your borders, or for being so small that if I changed anything, it would be a literal existential crisis. This just leaves us with the Midwest to straighten out. So let's start with Michigan. I'm sorry, but you can't have the Upper Peninsula anymore. It's physically connected to Wisconsin and therefore should belong to them. But in exchange, you can have the Toledo Strip back from Ohio, which is what you wanted originally. I'm not really sure what that does for you today, but it is what it is. And that's basically it. The rest are mostly fine. In fact, Minnesota might have the most perfect borders of any contiguous US state. It's mostly made up of the Minnesota, St. Croix, and Mississippi rivers aside from a few straight areas, and its southern border. But we'll just blame the southern border on Iowa. Indiana, Illinois, and Arkansas rounds out the last of the lower 48, and they're all passable, with nothing obvious to fix about them.
I'll be deep in the cold, cold ground before I recognize Missouri.
And, of course, there's Alaska and Hawaii.
I mean, Alaska is just so big. It is enormous. But what would be the point of splitting it? Like, what would be there to gain? More leadership, maybe? Having 3 governors, I suppose. Like, if you split it into 3, but then what do you get from that? Like,
but obviously, neither can have their borders changed because they don't border anyone else. Well, Alaska does border Canada, but we're not going international with this video. There's one final thing you might have noticed. I combined 4 states into 2 states, which means we only have 48 states. Now, maybe you're not a patriot, but I demand that the old Stars and Stripes have 50 full stars on them.
So he's going to split 2 states. I'm guessing Texas is going to be one of them.
So, we got to add a couple states.
He's going to split
This is
Texas.
actually pretty easy because, in case you were unaware, the United States owns territories that are not full states within the country. So we can cobble together some states from them, right? The most obvious full state to include would be Puerto Rico. It has more people than 19 other states, and as such, makes no sense to keep it as a territory in my eyes.
But don't they have their own, like, prime minister or president or something like that? So they would lose all of that, no?
So, welcome aboard Puerto Rico. And because they're nearby and also a territory, we're going to add the US Virgin Islands as part of Puerto Rico. Next up are the territories of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, these 2 territories are pretty small, but strategically they're very important. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to combine both into a single state called Mariana, because the whole island chain for both is called the Mariana Islands. It will be the smallest state by population by far.
I'm guessing the Mariana Trench is near here, isn't it? I think that's the deepest point, like, on Earth, of the ocean.
But when Nevada was admitted to the Union, there were fewer than 8,000 people living there. So I think we can manage. As for American Samoa, it kind of feels like it should be unified with Samoa, but that's really not for me to decide. So we'll leave them as a territory for now. And as for Washington, D.C., I'm just gonna leave it as is until the politicians figure it out. Basically, I'm not touching it. It can stay as a little half square for now. But there we have it. We got our 2 stars back with Puerto Rico.
So what do you guys think of this? I mean, from up here, to me, like, it doesn't look that much different to the America that I look at on maps, but because I'm not American, I don't see this, like, map very often. I'm sure Americans watching this, what do you guys think?
And Mariana making for a full 50 states once again. We did it. So it's the morning of the day that this video gets published on November 4th, 2024. And I've been working on it now for about 18 hours straight. I am tired. This video is a little rougher than my usual episodes, and for that, I do apologize. But I scrambled to pull this episode together last minute because tomorrow is the big day here in the United States. And I wanted to...
I mean, Yeah, very, very interesting video. Very interesting. I think most people, the vast majority of people, wouldn't want to make any changes to the borders. Like, but there's going to be people who agree. Maybe they don't agree with his idea of like changing the borders, but they do think some changes would be good for either the state or the country. I want to hear from you guys. Why do you think, if you do think the borders should change, why do you think they should? Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.